Good evening, folks, and welcome. And I want to start by prefacing this discussion by saying we're probably not going to solve this issue tonight. It's been debated for decades. There's obviously a lot at work here. In fact, there was a poll in today's Louisville Courier Journal indicating that the public is unsure and also divided on the impact that integration has had on JCPS over the last 45 years. Timely to say the least, because tonight we hope to have a very good and respectful dialogue on Jefferson County Public Schools and diversity, what worked, what hasn't, and perhaps the most important component here, what's next. My name's Andy Treinen. I'm the president and CEO here at the Fraser History Museum. Rachel and I came up with this program together. I told her early on I thought it was important that we disclose our connection to the district. So I went to private school, but I have two daughters that have gone through the district here in Louisville. Both of them ended up at Manual High School. One of them is now at Center College, and the other is a senior at DuPont Manual.
I'm Rachel Platt. I'm the Director of Community Engagement here at the Fraser Museum. We all good with audio? Can y'all hear okay? Okay, good. We welcome you both in person, yes, masked, distanced, and a capped audience tonight in the house here at the Fraser, and we welcome you all virtually as well. This discussion is part of our Let's Talk Bridging the Divide that we're doing here at the Fraser. We want to thank the Geens Foundation and an anonymous donor for their support in tonight's program. Full disclosure for me, I have two sons who went to Ballard High School. Another young man whom I consider a son moved in with us during high school. I became his educational guardian, and he also went to Ballard High School. We felt it was important for everybody to know, full disclosure from us, again, our connections to JCPS. Want to let you know we're going to save time at the end of the program for your all's questions. We have two tables in the back that have paper and pens that you can write those questions, and we'll retrieve those at the end of the program for you all to write your questions on that.
In just a bit, we're going to tackle the timeline for Jefferson County Public Schools with its quest to achieve diversity and the many iterations that we've seen of the student assignment plan, along with court-mandated busing that began in the mid-'70s. And the conversation, of course, so timely because one of our guests here, Superintendent Dr. Marty Polio, is proposing more changes to the student assignment plan and the magnet school system in that quest for diversity, access, and lessening the achievement gap.
As he said, Dr. Polio is one of our panelists tonight who has a long history with JCPS before he became superintendent. Started off as a social studies teacher at Shawnee in 1990, then a teacher and an assistant principal at Wagner, a principal at Jeffersontown. What did I say?
You said 90, I'm 97 was when I started.
Oh, 97. typo, my bad.
You gotta stay honored.
I need every year I can get here.
All right. Principal down does before assuming the current role.
Correct.
Like the other time.
You got the other stuff right.
97. All right. Deb Wesslund's another panelist. She served on the school board from 2007 until 2014. It was during her time on the board that the U.S. Supreme Court struck down JCPS's desegregation policy, saying it relied too heavily on a student's race when assigning them a school. We're going to talk about that. Of course, our third panelist right there is Raoul Cunningham, the president of the Louisville branch of the NAACP, who attended school in JCPS during segregation and efforts to integrate, but before court-ordered busing. He's going to talk about those experiences tonight and where he lands. He was a proponent of busing.
And finally, we have two special guests in the audience who we're going to talk with later in the program, both who have written about JCPS and diversity. Tracy Kmeyer, the author of the book From Brown to Meredith, is here. Thank you for being here. And education reporter Mandy McLaren with the Louisville Courier Journal, whose special series Magnetic Pool got so much attention recently. I want to start, though, our panelists with Dr. Polio. First of all, I am so glad that the board chose to bring on a candidate from within. I think it's telling, and I think there's so much institutional knowledge that comes from a superintendent from within. But let's start with that question about diversity. Is that still the end goal, and how much have your views changed on this issue throughout the years?
Well, I think that's a great question, and I don't know if we can ever say diversity was the end goal. I mean, I think anyone in education has to say, without a doubt, that student success and student outcomes is the end goal. I mean, that's why we're in this business, is to see students successful. There is nothing greater in this business, especially when you get to the time when you've been in this business for 25 years, to be able to reflect and see that you might have made a difference in a child's life. So, I mean, it's without a doubt those outcomes. However, we have to say research supports diversity is very important when it comes to student outcomes too. I mean, it has a positive effect on student outcomes. And so I think we have to say that is definitely a part of it, but the end game has to be the student outcomes and student success. I don't know if necessarily, my opinion has changed over the years. I have been in schools, the 4 schools that I spent have always been considered in many instances either the failing school or the school that used to be good. And so I've always been a part of a school that was kind of that underdog mentality. But in each of the schools, obviously, were very diverse student populations. So it didn't necessarily change as much, but throughout the years, what I have seen are too many kids that don't feel a sense of student belonging at their school, or disengaged too often. And so, my really intensity around fostering student engagement and student belonging at schools has increased dramatically throughout the years, especially when I became a principal and then when I took over at Dawson and seeing it from 30,000 feet at the district. It is, in my opinion, the most important thing for student success, that they feel a sense of belonging to their school. That can be curricular, that could be co-curricular, that could be extracurricular. But if a student doesn't feel a sense of belonging, they will seek it somewhere else. If they feel a sense of belonging and engagement at their school, they're much likelier and almost always successful, and research clearly supports that.
Debbie, we first met over a year ago and talking about this concept, integration, diversity, the big idea, the noble idea of making that happen. You served on the board. Where does that passion for you come from?
Well, I bought into the idea of diversity in schools quite early. I didn't grow up here. I grew up in a small town in Oklahoma. We had an integrated school system, so even when I was in school in the 60s and 70s, it was an integrated school system. But we moved here from Washington, D.C., which is a big urban area with race issues and all of that. I was really, when we moved here, I had already ordered the book before I got here of JCPS and learned what they did as far as assigning students with diversity in mind. I was excited about that. I thought that was great. So, and I have one daughter who went to Norton Elementary and no middle school and Atherton High School. That was her choice. She took advantage. She didn't apply to Manual. Ballard was our home school, but she wanted to go to Atherton, so she was able to exercise that choice. So that choice part was really good too. But back to diversity, yes, educational achievement and learning is what we want students to do and be able to live in this world. But to live in the world, it's a pretty diverse world, right? I lived in D.C. a while. That's way different than Seminole, Oklahoma, where I grew up. And we want kids to be able to do well wherever they end up. And having gone to school with children from maybe different neighborhoods, maybe different countries, certainly different countries, we have a real international community as well, also prepares them for the world. So I bought into it early on.
Raoul, how much does diversity factor into your big equation of education?
It factors quite a bit. I grew up and went and started school when it was segregated. I then went to male high when it was integrated. My experiences at Male were not good. I was one of the student leaders for the sit-in demonstrations. The principal of Male at that time, Melvin Maupin, was the candidate for mayor. He was against the public accommodations ordinance. And he called me into his office and told me if I didn't cease my activities, I was not going to graduate. And one of my classmates I see is in the audience, Connie Cosby. And Connie and I rode a bus every day to school. And we experienced discrimination. And therefore, I just was not, it had an impact on my life. And with the NAACP, I still support diversity.
I know we're going to talk more about your experience a little bit later on, but that experience that you had in high school impacted what you did for college. You, after Male, said you did not want to go to an integrated college, correct?
Yes, that was the biggest fight my mother and I had.
Over that decision?
Over that decision. And I even threatened that I would go into the Army before I went to an integrated college. I just did not want to experience, because in Louisville, I had my friends, I had my home, and there was a certain amount of security there. And I felt if I went to Hanover, where I had a scholarship, to be up in Indiana in the woods, I had no support.
And again, we're going to talk more about that experience a little bit later. Dr. Polio, let's talk about some of the changes that you're proposing in the student assignment plan. You've been talking about it for about 2 years now. Perhaps the biggest proposed change is the dual resides proposal, which would allow students in Louisville's West End to choose between a school close to home and one elsewhere in the county. What led you to that? Is that the sense of belonging that you talked about, feeling the connectedness, and perhaps some people haven't felt that? What led you to that?
Well, I want to, be as candid as I can in this conversation, and talk about the experiences that I've had. And I can say it dates back, obviously, to me being a basketball coach at Shawnee High School. And not really, I was didn't know what I was doing, not really understanding at that time why we went out and played Pleasure Ridge Park, and we got the doors kicked out of us out at PRP when they were #1 in the state, and all the kids on PRP's team lived right across the street from Shawnee. I didn't really understand the dynamics with that. And that, I was a basketball coach and a young teacher. But then being at Wagner and J-Town, obviously we would have our buses come out from West Louisville, and it was a significant percentage of the school. Great kids that I developed great relationships with, but I never really did understand at that point how someone who lived across the street from J-Town High School was able to go right across the street to J-Town, but other students, especially those in West Louisville, did not. And then really seeing the outcomes and the challenges around student belonging when I got to this position really solidified my beliefs. I want to make this clear. I do not believe in neighborhood schools. I do not believe in neighborhood schools. I want to make this clear. This is unfortunately a political issue that seems to have politics all around, like who is the winner and loser out of this. For me, it is all about children and students of JCPS and ensuring they have a sense of student belonging. And right now, all too often, our most at-risk students, oftentimes those in West Louisville, are the ones that have the least sense of student belonging. That is with attendance, that is with test scores and proficiency, which I don't like to use, that is with our surveys of students. And so we have to see that and look at that. 85% right now of black students in JCPS attend their reside school, not a magnet, which I know we'll get into later. Very problematic. Anytime a student raises their hand and says, I want to go to a school for a certain reason, the likelihood of them being successful is much greater. But I also, as I looked at this, believe, and I believe this, I'm going to say this, I believe in '76, the change that happened was magnificent and an achievement that this city should be proud of. But I also have to say in 1984, a major change came to the student assignment plan for middle and high school specifically, and there hasn't been a change since 1984. We have to own that, since 1984. From 76 to 84, students went all directions, east to west, west to south, south to west, based on the first letter of their last name. That was very controversial for this city. We have to know, we all know the history of that. I think everybody does. And if you haven't, I would tell you to get Tracy Kmeyer's book because it's fantastic. But in '84, so at that time, it was close to it wasn't quite 50-50 between black students and white students getting on a bus, leaving their neighborhood or their community in order to ensure diversity, but it was about 45-55 in that range. In 1984, it all changed. And what the district said at that time was, for the most part, students in the East End, the South End, Southeast Louisville do not have to leave their community. They may remain where they are and go close to home. Almost predominantly white students. Students in West Louisville at that time were the ones that they said, okay, these students are going to be going to other communities to ensure diversity. So now we are at a place where 95% of the students who leave their community for the sake of diversity are black students. And I think that's very problematic. I believe in diversity, but I think we either have to do one or two things as a community. All students must be responsible, all families, every single member of the community should be responsible and have the onus of diversity on us as a whole community, or give everyone the chance and the opportunity for choice and to stay close to home. Secondly, in 1984, that's when the current magnet structure was implemented. And it is, and let me be clear, and I know we'll talk about Mandy's series a little bit later, but in 1984, magnets were developed to attract white families to come to the inner core. It is achieving exactly as it was designed to do. Our student assignment system is doing exactly as it was designed to do. We haven't had a change since 1984. It is way overdue, folks. So we can debate what the solution is. I believe that. I do not believe we can debate that we have a significant equity issue with our student assignment plan. To the point, and I want to be clear, to the point, student attendance is one of the most important factors in a student being successful. We would all agree with that. Our high school students that travel from our dual reside zone, 1 out of 2 are chronically absent. 50%. 50%, 1 out of 2. That means 18 more days of school a year they are missing, 1 out of 2. Now, I'm not saying it's just on student assignment. There's a lot of factors research-wise that go into attendance at schools and chronic absence. But it is a big problem. When I am the principal at Doss High School and a student misses the bus who resides in West Louisville by Shawnee Park, and there is no TARC to Doss High School. That's a problem. And I saw it day in and day out. So we can argue about the solutions, I believe this. What we cannot argue about is what we have now is inequitable.
Let's talk about that history and bridging to the future. And Debbie, for many kids, it is those extracurricular activities. It's football, it's lacrosse, it's band, it's play that gives them their best experiences in high school and their best memories, sometimes their best influences and their best educational opportunities. How much did that or does that play into the assignment equation, especially for families who can't bus their kids, or who can't drive their kids to the West End for football practice in the evening?
Well, frankly, our student assignment plan is based on getting a certain ratio of kids into schools. And we were aware of that, aware that sometimes that's an issue, but it was always an issue of how do we do this legally, how do we do it fairly. I remember when the Supreme Court decision came down, we were very pleased that they did endorse the idea of diversity and gave us an opening to update the plan. And even then later on, when we hired Dr. Orfield to come in and redo that plan, make it a little better for kids to stay closer to home. We were able to get the census tracts defined differently so we could understand where kids were that would help make schools more diverse and maybe be close by. So that's something we did do in around between 2010 and 2012 was redo the assignment plan so more kids could be closer to home. And that's mostly for elementary. I think middle school and to high it may not have made that much difference. But no, that is a problem. It sure is a problem.
Raoul, let's go to you with what Dr. Polio said as far as the dual resides. Where do you weigh in on that?
I'm unsure until I see a definite plan. I'm unsure where I stand. But I do have some serious questions about dual resides. One, will it produce all black schools in the West End? Secondly, will it produce Title I schools, poverty? And will you concentrate African American and poor in the school systems in the West End? That is, I think, a major concern, and one that we have to work through. I do believe in diversity, but I also realize that today, with the achievement gaps, the education of our children is either more important or equally important as diversity.
Dr. Polio, what would you respond to Raoul with that, with the concerns about poverty, schools in the West End, because we hear, oh, they will be funded. Traditionally, that hasn't happened in those situations. So there is a lot of speculation, there's a lot of questions about, can you really do that? How would you respond to Raoul with that?
First, I would say we have to look historically at the problem and say what before desegregation, specifically when there were schools mostly in West Louisville designated for black students, did they get the same resources that other schools did? And that is a clear no. I mean, hand-me-down textbooks, poor facilities, all of these things, that teachers not paid the same. So there is no doubt that, historically we have to own that as a city and as a school system. Now, at that time, it was two different school systems.
Right.
But when we look at a lot of the inequities that existed and were created to keep black and white students apart, many of them still linger around as, part of a student assignment plan. But the even more than that, we had a high school in West Louisville that had condemned third floor since 1982. In 1982, the third floor at Shawnee High School was considered structurally unsound. The district just said, I'm sorry, we can't invest $5 or $6 million to fix that. And that sat in this city for nearly 40 years. I mean, that is an embarrassment on this city. We have to own that. There is no other school in America, I bet, that had a condemned third floor. So it is clear. Mr. Cunningham is exactly correct on this. The challenge we face is a couple of things. First of all, we are one of the most segregated cities when it comes to housing patterns in America. And I don't want to put the excuse on it, but it makes it so challenging when it comes to student assignment and we have become more segregated as a community. That's a problem in our community that makes it very difficult, what we face that many other cities don't face. But what has happened in the past 40 years since 1984? At that time, and this is a problem too, I don't have the exact figure, but when I started in this district, free and reduced lunch percentage was less than 50% of the students in JCPS back in the late 90s. We're closing in on 70%, folks. 70% of our students qualify for free or reduced lunch. Over 6,000 are homeless. All right, so this is the reality. Most of our students come from some degree of poverty. And so right now, what has happened to our high schools, for instance, when I first started here, there may have been 5 or 6 Title I schools, which is for us is more than 70% of their student population qualifying for free or reduced lunch. Right now, of our reside schools, we only have 3 that are not Title I. Ballard, Eastern, and Atherton. All obviously East End schools. Every other reside school is a Title I school. So what we are doing right now is we are sending students from West Louisville to schools of high poverty. So when I was the principal of Doss, and about 250 students were coming, Doss had about 85% free and reduced lunch and was a majority minority school. So, we right now are sending students into high poverty schools. What I think the answer is clearly, first of all, is choice. I believe the parents in West Louisville deserve and they should have choice just like families in East Louisville, number one. And so they get to choose, which school is funded the best, which school has the best programs, which school has the best support, and make that choice. I believe in that. Second of all, we obviously have to fund differently and ensure the community, which is a hard thing to do because there's been so many broken promises. I understand that clearly. And so all we have to do is look at 18th and Broadway to see broken promises. So when I say, which you'll probably ask, yes, we have to build new schools to make this happen. That's just words for me, and it's very difficult to say that. If I say we need to fund differently, obviously Mr. Cunningham's right. We got to have that in a plan and some type of promise or guarantee that it's going to continue past me, past this board, because I think that obviously is a big fear when it comes to talking about these changes.
If there would be any turnover, does your promise carry on, or does it stop with the next person?
We don't build new schools. We have not built new schools. I've heard you talk about that investment. Does your plan ultimately lead to building new schools in the West End?
So we will have to. There is no option. So because for the past 50 years, for the most part, once Central became a magnet, Western Middle School became a magnet. The only school, technically, middle or high in West Louisville that is not a magnet is the Academy at Shawnee. And so for us to do this, there is no doubt we have to build facilities. And I think our schools, we should invest in West Louisville so our schools are the best schools, facility-wise, program-wise, support-wise. And without a doubt, when you look at the concentration of poverty, it will most likely be high poverty. But we have to mitigate that with our financial, budgetary support, and I believe great facilities. My goal here is that West Louisville parents and families would struggle to make a choice because they have 2 choices right now. And I will say, the number one call we get in student assignment right now, outside of how do I get in the manual, is why can't I have a choice close to home? So for instance, my child who lives in West Louisville has no choice but to get on the bus and go to Crosby Middle School, out in Middletown, and that doesn't work for us. How do we stay close to home? But there is no doubt we would have to build a middle school, at least one, potentially 2 middle schools and another high school.
One quick question, Andy, and then I know you've got some as well. So from the sounds of it, the one question I did have, has the brunt of the burden been on children in the West End when it comes to achieving diversity?
Excuse me, could you repeat that,
Yes,
Rachel?
the brunt of the burden, has it been on kids in the West End to achieve diversity?
It is right now.
Yeah.
It is, and so it's hard for me. I've changed that. I can't say what anyone's intention was prior to mine. That's for historians to say. But when I look at it now, I have to say that is the case.
And Debbie and Raoul, would you weigh in on that?
I would think that's true. There are families who can exercise options more likely. I will say though, when I was on the board and when students were getting assigned to schools and a parent may get a choice they didn't like, almost always they had looked up the achievement of the school where they were going to attend. It wasn't, I don't want to be part of this diversity plan. It was they knew the achievement scores of that school. And that was the reason. Parents will drive around the county twice to get to a school that they think their kid is going to do well in. Sometimes I think the long bus ride part gets, overemphasized. They want to go to a school where they can get a good education. And I think most families would want to go to a school that's doing well, that's also diverse, you know. But I understand the issues about not being able to participate after school or needing to be close to home. But my experience, of course, representing an East End community was, you know, they want to go to school where they are going to have a high achieving atmosphere, and the diversity was a good thing too.
Raoul, did you want to weigh in?
Yes. The African American community has borne the brunt of diversity or the brunt of segregation. During segregation, we passed schools that we could not attend. And we've always borne that brunt. And I think much to the credit, we've borne it, we understand it, and some are still willing to bear that brunt in order to achieve and get a good education.
An incredible audience here. We've got principals and board members here and community leaders. Thank you all for being here. So many of you know this timeline, but we thought it was important to kind of roll through the timeline of what has happened through the years. So let's kind of do that. Let's take a look at the brief timeline of JCPS and desegregation. What happened is not brief. Our timeline had to be. So what started on all wheels in motion was obviously 1954 with Brown versus the Board of Education, when segregation in public schools was ruled inherently unequal.
Then, of course, in 1956, Louisville began desegregating its schools by residents without regard to race and allowing transfers out of assigned schools.
In the early 1970s, lawsuits were filed requesting desegregation of the Louisville and Jefferson County school systems and achieving it through merger. That merger happened 2 years later.
Then in 75 and 76, the merged system implements Judge Gordon's desegregation plan, requiring busing. Students are bused according to the first initial of their last name and their grade level. Black students are to be bused up to 10 of their 12 years in school, while white students are bused 2 of their 12 years. Each of you, where were you at this time? And I guess, Debbie, you were not here.
Right.
Dr. Polio, you were, I don't know how old you were at the time. I'm not going to do the math.
More than you think.
You're going to say, were you in college then?
I don't know. So, where were you? Do you have any memories or your family?
So I was born here in Louisville. My dad was the basketball coach at DuPont Manual High School before it was a magnet in 1968 to 71. He always claims that it shows me how great of a coach he turned around Manual, who was terrible, but he had this guy named Philip Bond on his team, and I always say good players make a difference, Dad. But in 1971, when I was born, he started the coaching, you know, the ladder of moving. So we moved around my entire childhood. I never, although my mom and dad are from here, my grandparents were from here, I didn't grow up here. So in 71, I left and didn't come back here until after college. So came back here in 97. But we were always, my grandparents lived here, we were always visiting, and one of my first memories was the intense conversations that were happening in my grandfather's house about the desegregation and what was happening in 1976. But I can't say that I lived it personally as a student.
And Raoul, you were in D.C., were you?
I was with Senator Walter D. Huddleston in Washington at that time, and we monitored. Since I was one of the senior staff members from Louisville, I had to monitor the old fax machines looking for Courier articles on what had happened, and by telephone. At that time, Governor Carroll asked the senators to set up some hearings on busing. And at one point, only the anti-busing people were invited to the hearing. And I went to Senator, and he allowed me to coordinate and bring others in. So was very familiar and had to come back to Louisville often during that period of time. And it was not a good time to be from Louisville. But we were able to get through it and survive.
All right, we're
Thank
going
you.
to go back to the timeline, Andy.
Yeah, by 1978, the court-ordered busing ended, but JCPS decided to continue with busing.
And then in 1984, and this is what Dr. Polio was referring to earlier, the desegregation plan for middle and high schools is switched to a system of zones and satellites so most students can go to the school based on where they live, and racial guidelines are implemented.
In 1992, widespread busing is replaced by a program designed to desegregate elementary schools by giving parents a choice of schools with some racial guidelines still in place.
1996, the district approves a plan requiring that all schools be between 15 and 50% black.
By 1998, challenges are underway as 6 black parents sue to throw out restrictions on black enrollment at Central High School after their children were denied entry. Racial quotas at Central are banned, and admission procedures are redesigned at magnet schools.
In 2002, other challenges from parents whose children aren't allowed to enroll in schools where they want to attend, and a bit later that included Crystal Meredith, whose case landed in the U.S. Supreme Court.
And then in 2007, the Supreme Court, in a divided opinion, strikes down the JCPS desegregation policy, saying that it relied too heavily on students' race when assigning them to schools. In 2007, Debbie, is when you're elected into the school board. We both worked at WHAS and did a morning show together, but I'm curious, what was it like to be on the school board at that time?
Well, you had a huge sense of responsibility, and me being new, I had a lot to learn, and I really leaned on, I must say, Marty's staff and the staff that was there when I was there are excellent, from the attorneys to student assignment to advocates. You really felt supported, but it felt like it was going to be a huge responsibility, which it was. And I remember when the Supreme Court decision came down, several of us were in the office with the SCOTUS blog up, and we'd keep clicking, refresh, refresh, refresh. And when it came out, there was, even though you felt like you lost something, they closed a door and opened a window, right? So that we had a way forward to, and it didn't seem to me at that time that there was really any effort on the board to give up on diversity. They just couldn't do it by an individual child, black or white. You could use, draw boundaries differently to take in neighborhoods that had different characteristics and do it that way. So we moved along in that way. And we had really, as I said, really great staff, and that opening the Supreme Court gave us to continue the diversity focus.
And I've got that up there in 2008, so that's kind of the new student assignment plan that was born, is that correct? Right, with those multiple measures, yeah, I can't read all that fast, but I can see. But that was kind of what ended up coming out of that in 2008.
And then it was updated, you'll probably get
Right,
to it. Yeah.
and then now we'll go to 2000.
Yeah, 2012, the Supreme Court upholds JCPS's ability to decide where to assign students. JCPS increases elementary clusters to now 13 and adopts a new system using income, education, and minority population for diversity index. This is a condensed version, complicated to say the least. And this is where we stand today. You cited Dr. Polio. 1984 is the last real change. There were changes to the system, but I guess you could argue none that achieved any success towards the achievement gap.
Well, and I want to say this, I'm not, we have an achievement gap that hasn't moved, in many years. And I think, unfortunately, that is something that is occurring in many cities across America. So examination of education as a whole is critical in this. And I don't want to say the achievement gap is that it's just the achievement gap, or that it's just student assignment that has caused the achievement gap. I believe we have so many things to change. We are changing, from how we hire to how we support schools, to curriculum. I mean, there are so many things, magnet, student assignment. So it is not just one thing, but I do think student assignment is very problematic when we look at racial equity in our district.
History is very interesting here, and you know, there were clearly some unintended consequences. And I'll start with you, Raoul, and we'll work our way back. Were intentions always good?
Intentions were good. I don't think that we at that point had envisioned some of the problems that we are now facing, such as achievement gaps. Poverty, safety are all issues that we're facing today that we did not necessarily face back when we were doing the last student assignment programs. And I think that today I won't jump ahead, but I just don't think we had envisioned the magnitude of the issues that we're facing today.
I want to bring Tracy Kmeyer into the conversation. We'll have you turn on the microphone there, Tracy. You literally wrote the book on the history with your book, From Brown to Meredith. I know a couple people, Steve Porter right in the front, he's got it under his seat there, just to let people know. It really is a wonderful read. You interviewed so many people, and your takeaway in part was how complicated a ride this has been, to say the least. I mean, I was making notes on everything going, it's really hard to follow, like, oh my gosh, what all has happened with this district. Whether things were good or bad, though, really depended on who you interviewed and you spoke with.
To some extent, and do you want me to stand up?
Oh, yeah, and
okay.
then kind of, if you want to kind of turn
kind
to
of
the audience.
So I did want to start off by saying, just to clarify, I used interviews that were done by other people.
Right.
So what happened, there was several oral history projects that interviewed hundreds of people in the community. I read them, and actually, it was reading them in the context of Meredith, the decision, because I found that the public dialogue in Louisville since I'd moved here about busing had been so negative and so simplistic, right? It was all been doing the same thing since the 70s, and it never worked, and just constant negativity and constant, as if nothing had ever changed. So part of the reason I wrote the book was because it is complicated, because even as you were doing the timeline, I was like, oh, you sort of skipped this. There was a lot of stuff that happened in between, like the resegregation of the city, like the fact that the county never even tried to integrate, like the persistent resistance, right? So between 76 and 84, there was constant tinkering with the system and constant resistance. But what was most interesting to me was the people that I found in these interviews, and this is your question of intention, who supported busing, supported integration, supported it for equity, not because they wanted white and black children to sit next to each other, but because they realized that to get equal resources, you had to have white and black children sitting next to each other. People who worked very hard to make the initial busing system work. People who worked very hard to come up with solutions when things kept backsliding. And so it really struck me that it's far more complicated than the sort of public dialogue would have, and that there's far more support in both the white and the black community for the concept and for the efforts when they went in. One other little factual thing, the burden was always on black students, and the argument at the time given was demography, just sheer numbers, right? There are far more white students, far less black students, to make the school system match these ratios that you were stuck with, required that. I do think that that was a cover for, we don't want to piss off the white parents a little bit too, right? So coming up with a demographic reason to say we don't want to piss off too many white parents, but the burden was always on black students.
Thank you.
I got a little away from your original question.
No.
That was excellent insight.
Anybody want to weigh in on anything Tracy just said? And Raoul, I know your interview was part of what was used in the book, and your experience, like you said, at Male High School was not a positive one.
That's correct. As there were some lessons learned though from that experience. One, for a young black man, how to deal with white folks. It was learned. To learn the difference and to know that there is no difference was learned. The education from the book perspective was good. The discrimination was not.
Debbie?
Dr. Polio, you have an opportunity with the current board to change this. Debbie, you're no longer on the board, so I'm just curious before we move on if you think there's anywhere we went wrong.
Well, you know, you had to experience all of these steps. Nobody knew what was going to come next, you know. How could you know? You just like, I reread your book before this event here, and I remembered when you first started moving kids for integration. We didn't just decide we wanted to bus kids. What we decided is we wanted to diversify the populations in the schools, right? Or didn't decide, we were told that's what we needed to do. It was not a busing program, it's an integration program. But you found out that the schools in the West End and maybe other places were hugely under-resourced. That's just was this sad thing how else would you have found that out? Who would have gone and figured that out? We were forced to find that out. That's a good thing. We had to face that. And so that's one thing I think about. And I think about those parents that would call me and say, much later on when I was on the board, and ask about the achievement in a school. My answer, I wanted to say this, as I said, there's high achieving kids in every school. Maybe not as many, but there are teachers that are some of the best teachers in the world in other parts of town that you don't go to very often. So there is potential there for your child to do very well. That's all I would say, and I would then tell them, here's how here's this process. If you want to try for a transfer, you go do this. But that's what I would do. But I just think sometimes you have to take these tough steps, and tough things happen, but you learn something that's really important. And there's a lot more to do, but that was huge to me.
Yeah, I'd like to say, because maybe other than these two ladies in the front row, I think I know as much about student assignment as anybody, and they've studied it and done a lot. But over the Christmas break, I was looking, my office is not a nice office. I don't do much with offices. I need to be better at that. But I was looking at some of the old books that we have in the bookshelf that's probably been in the office of the superintendent at Van Hoos for 40 years. And I found a book in the back, looked like it had been written in 1960, and I pulled it out, and it was called The Louisville Story. And it was written by Omer Carmichael. And I was like, Carmichael? I didn't realize the first name. Omer Carmichael was the superintendent of the Louisville public school system during Brown versus Board of Education. And so I read the book, and the whole book was celebrating the city of Louisville for complying with the law of Brown versus Board of Education without having the riots that occurred in other cities. And so Omer Carmichael actually sat down with Dwight D. Eisenhower shortly after that and was told, how did you do this? Like, how did this great city of Louisville? And so, I read the book. But we also have to know at that time versus Brown versus Board of Education, they created what was called a student transfer and said, white families, if you don't want to go to school with black families, fill out this student transfer and we will give you your request. 85% of white families filled that out. And so it's hard to say what the intentions were at that time or judge someone's intentions. I do look back at a school district at that time and say, gosh, how could someone make that decision, to do that? And so it does make me think often, like as a legacy, I don't want to be looked upon years from now, someone say, he had that for 5 years, 6 years, whatever it was, and didn't make any attempt to improve this racially inequitable student assignment plan. So, that's my charge in this. The other thing I want to highlight that I don't think we know enough of, and I don't think this was anyone's fault, we really have 4 student assignment plans. We do not have 1 student assignment plan. We have an elementary, we have a middle, we have a high school, and we have a magnet student assignment plan. The elementary, middle, and highs were done separately at separate times. So really, they should lay over each other and be the same. But right now, when you look at them, especially in West Louisville with our satellite areas, a child can go to Cunningham Middle School, and they have no choice. We have to be honest about this. You know, if a student is not fully successful in elementary, middle with grades, behavior, and attendance, then they have no choice. They go to their reside school. Their reside school is Cunningham, out by Ballard High School. That same student's high school they have to go to is Valley High School in Valley Station. So even if they go to Cunningham and have peers and get involved and friends, their high school cannot go to Ballard High School. They must go to Valley Station. And even worse, we have parents right now that have a child in middle school at Cunningham Middle School and a child in high school at Valley High School. That is a reality right now. And so these are the things that I really look at and say we must change. So once again, I'll go to, we can debate what the answers are. I don't think we can debate whether we keep what we have right now.
You're a middle school student, you see the culture, you see the bigger kids right there in the high school right next door, and that's not an opportunity or an option for you.
So clearly, the child that lives in that neighborhood where Cunningham Middle School is located right now can, without question, can walk into the office, their parents can walk them in and enroll them in Cunningham Middle School, and 3 years later, go right across the street or down the road and enroll them in Ballard High School. That same child who lives in West Louisville does not have that opportunity and must go to Valley Station unless they get in a magnet school.
Interesting.
Problematic.
This is a picture. This became iconic. This is one of the best 100 photos in the history of the Louisville Courier Journal. We had a program with them. We had Mark Stewart here. We invited Darrell Hughes. He couldn't make it here. But this handshake on the first day of school, this is at Greenwood Elementary, and this is right the first day of busing. Raoul, I'm curious, take me back to where you are mentally at this time, and what are you thinking as this is happening? Is this celebratory at the time?
Yes, it was. I think it shows that students can survive and do well in an integrated situation. I think it spoke volumes about Louisville and its school systems. If you look at that picture, and it's gone, well, you see it everywhere. You've seen it everywhere. It just spoke well of the city and the system.
We wanted to mention that before we move ahead to the magnets. And Dr. Polio, you talked about magnets early on. Why were they developed? I mean, the history of magnets. You touched on it a little bit earlier. Let's go back to that.
Yes. So, you know, and I think Tracy does a good job talking about this. Mandy did a good job in her articles as well. I mean, it's well documented. In 1984, you know, Manual at that time, DuPont Manual was a reside school, predominantly with kids around the old Louisville, Churchill Downs area. That became a magnet so that what would happen is students coming from East Louisville to this high-achieving magnet school would be considered voluntary busing, so that the percentages could still be, that when they said busing, that it would be close to black and white students the same. But it's very clear that magnets were created in 1984 to bring students into the urban core, almost word for word is what it said, predominantly white families, to achieve diversity. But what never happened, which is different in most cities that win grants and awards for their magnet programs based on best practices, the magnet's not supposed to just be exclusionary. The magnet is supposed to draw students together into a type of learning experience that all families want in a very diverse setting. And it should serve those students in that neighborhood as well, or that community as well, which is not what we have right now. So, you know, Montessori would be an example of a magnet. So not all students would want Montessori, not all families would, but You know, if a family wants that, they would be attracted to that magnet, that type of learning, and it would be a diverse setting or environment for students in the entire community.
Let's talk about some of the changes that you're proposing to magnets. What are the main ones?
So, you know, first and foremost, I have to say, you know, I have a daughter who is 17 years old, and an interesting path through student assignment through JCPS. So when she was going into elementary school, and bear with me just a second, we live in the Highlands close to Atherton High School. At that time, she's 17 now, but when she was going into kindergarten at that time, and still is, Bloom was considered the good school in that community. Hawthorne was not considered the good school in the community. So we could judge why, test scores, you know, whatever we would want to dig into. We went to Bloom, toured it, great school. We went to Hawthorne, we went inside the school, we went in the 3rd grade, Spanish immersion. This incredible math teacher is speaking fluent Spanish to the children, and the kids are speaking it. They've learned fluent Spanish by 3rd grade. We said, that's the school we want to go to. She went to that school, which is considered, you know, the school for our community there in the Highlands. Extremely great, fantastic experience we had there. She got into dance and drama shortly after, and did all of that stuff. She was never an athlete. I tried, but she just didn't want to do that. But no middle school was the school that had a dance and drama program. And that's what she wanted to do. So we applied to get into a magnet program inside of a school that has a reside. She was accepted. Great experience. And I'll be honest, 8th grade, she's in DuPont Manual right now at YPass. And that was a hard one for me. I can tell you, you know, and Manual does great. I mean, incredible kids. Dr. Newman, the principal, is back there right now. Throughout my career, it was a tough pill for me to swallow because I was at Shawnee, Wagner, J-Town, and Doss. And I saw incredible teachers all the way, and all along people saying to me, why can't you be more like Manual? And I'm like, if you had any idea what these teachers are doing in here and what we are doing every single day with some of these incredible challenges, I'd put the teachers up against anybody in America. But you know, that is a part of our culture right now for many of our kids. She has this friends group, and I have to get into Manual with my friends. And the pressure on kids to do that is immense right now in our community. It is an immense pressure. So it was tough for me to swallow. I was pushing her to Atherton, but I gave her the opportunity to apply. We've had a great experience at Manual. I don't want to say that. But what I want to make sure that we do with all of our magnets is provide transparency. Transparency of how you get in or don't get in. You know, most of them being straight lottery. Making sure that we have diversity goals for our student populations in our magnets. Our magnets should reflect the demographics of our student population. And we have got to work to do that. I mean, we have to do that. We must make sure that we don't kick kids out of a magnet school. I can tell you, and that is a controversial one.
Yeah, that is.
I can tell you as a principal of a reside school, when a student got kicked out of a magnet school, they're not coming to school excited, and now I feel a sense of belonging in this new school. And the reside school, the child has had a terrible experience. They've been kicked out of a school, and now this reside school must take them in and figure out the interventions for them. I believe this, when a student is accepted into a school, that school must say, they're our student now. And we must provide the intervention and support that a kid needs to get them on track if they need to. So, you know, those things, really having a clear process at central office. Right now, what the problem is, every school gets to decide on their own who is in and who is out. And so I think we must have a clear, very transparent way to say, here are the students that are in the school. Here's how you get into a school. You know, these are the things that need to happen. We have already eliminated criteria for elementary school. If you didn't know this, about 3 years ago, we had criteria for kids to get into elementary school. They had to, in some schools, have a headshot. They had to tour the school. As a 4-year-old, they had to tell the school what their address and name was. I mean, we talk about inequities. That's a 4-year-old. And so what we are doing with our magnets is mostly exclusionary. I think we've got to open the doors and make sure we have the diversity and support to students in our magnets just like every other school.
Mandy McLaren wrote a recent series of reports entitled Magnetic Pull. Mandy, do you mind grabbing the microphone there and kind of giving us a synopsis of what you found?
Testing?
Gotcha.
Great.
Very good, thank you.
Pop up here.
Oh,
if that makes
absolutely,
sense.
please, and
Okay.
turn toward the audience.
If you'll allow me a minute before I get into magnet schools, I think, folks up here talked about their bias, if you will, right, where their children went to school. And I think it's important for me to talk about, my background and how that affects who I am as a reporter and how I approached all of these stories. So I taught in New Orleans for 7 years. My first year there, I was in a traditional public school in the sort of suburban ring around New Orleans. And this was a school that was tied up in the middle of essentially a desegregation lawsuit. And what that meant is that at the school that had been traditionally white with white female teachers, the population now was increasingly Black and Latino. And so that first year, I really, I'm a first year teacher, I'm idealistic, optimistic, here to close the achievement gap. And I was met pretty harshly with seeing up close and personal how these systems treat our children of color. They were not wanted there, and they knew it. And that affected not just them academically, but them socially and emotionally. This was at the height of the recession. I got laid off, got rehired, and I ended up going to a charter school. I won't get into charters right now, but it's very different in New Orleans than a lot of people in Kentucky conceive of charter schools. But going to a charter school, all of the students there were Black. I think over my 7 years, I could count the number of white students I had on a single hand. But what was different there is every single staff member was so invested in every single child in that building. They truly believed that they could achieve the highest of expectations. So I went from a situation where, it was more diverse, but were the children of color really being taught the way that they should have been? And then I went to a situation that was extremely segregated, and I got a different feeling, and I got to see what it looked like for adults to believe in these kids. But at the same time, I'm not a school that is 100% free and reduced lunch. And I spent 5 years there, and then another year at a very similar school. And so I'm able, from that perspective, to know when Raoul talks about, if we're going to have more high poverty, all Black schools, the injustice that's happening in our public school system over the lack of resources and experienced teachers, we tried our damnedest, but the majority of the staff was as young as me. So I just want to throw that out there, that when I come to, because I wrote about busing before I wrote about magnets, that I'm sort of bringing all of that bias to the table, and I think that's important to disclose.
So a synopsis of what you found, and then we'll get the reaction of the panel here. I know it's difficult because it was a very long and involved series that you did. Just give us kind of the thumbnail of it.
Okay.
Yeah, I know.
You have 17 seconds.
Sure, and I think the biggest thing to say out loud is a lot of what I reported wasn't really a big shock for people, right? Maybe some of the...
Well, let's ask the audience here. Were you all surprised by anything that you read in it? Raise your hand if you were surprised. Raise your hand if it was exactly what you thought. Okay, for those who are watching virtually, most of the audience raised their hand. It's what they thought.
And that's what I was going for, to be honest, because again, I'm an outsider, so I came in here with fresh eyes after having that teaching experience, and I was like, what's going on here? This seems a little off. And I brought up several of these stories early. I've been here since 2017 to an editor in the newsroom, and I was told, well, that's just the way it is here. I'm stubborn though, so I continued, reporting those stories out. I see Deanna here in the audience, who is just such a meaningful source, and I'm so glad to see you. But for the magnet series, a lot of what I reported, folks already knew, like you said. We know that the magnet schools, especially the elite ones, right, are serving our middle-class kids, our middle-class white kids primarily. And then there's not actually an equal shot to get into these programs. And then when they're there, talking about the exits, I don't really have the stats off the top of my head, but the majority of children being exited from the magnet programs are children of color, are low-income children. One thing we also really wanted to focus on in the first story is the effect that this has on our reside schools, on what some people like to call our bad schools in Louisville. And the story was not, the purpose was not to say let's end all magnets, they're terrible, but to just put the facts out there on the table for the community to see that with the way that the system is set up right now, these schools like in Iroquois, they are never going to get out from where they are right now. It's just impossible with the way that their student population is set up. And then when you talk about test scores like Debbie's brought up, that just reinforces the whole cycle. So you make sure that this school is all low poverty kids. That doesn't bode well on state test scores. Families look at those state test scores. Are they going to send their kid to Iroquois? No, and it just keeps, the cycle keeps going. That's the place that we're in right now, it's going to continue like that. And for some schools, and I believe Western is one, they are losing 3 and 4 high-achieving and middle-class kids to JCPS's magnets and choice programs. So out of the kids in Western's reside zone, kids that if we had no choice programs would go to Western, 3 out of 4 kids that are considered high-achieving and come from middle-class homes are not going to Western. And that has an impact.
Let me ask you a quick question, reaction, then I want to get reaction from the panel. What reaction did you get from your readership on the series?
You know what? We've written, since I've been here, written about many stories that involve race and JCPS, and we sort of come to expect the maybe not really progressive responses that we get from a certain portion of the community. But what struck me with the magnetic pull project was, yeah, I got a handful of those, but I got a deluge of responses from folks in the community that said, thank you for putting this out there. I'm a teacher at this school. This is exactly what's happening. Or I was a parent trying to navigate this system. Or I'm an alumni. And the amount of folks that said, this is a problem, it's time for us to address it, was something I'm going to tell you I did not expect. I thought I was going to get just, the entire manual PTA sending me hate mail.
Did you get that too?
No, not really. I'm sure they had their own conversations, but not to me.
Thank you very much. And then Dr. Polio, when you read this series, your thoughts on it?
Well, I think she hit it right on the money, and I thought what she did was put a great job of putting faces and stories on that as well, which was so impactful. What I appreciated the most of the series was the highlighting of the bad school, good school narrative, which I'm just going to tell you all, that is in every community in America. This is a bad school, this is a good school. It seems to me worse in Jefferson County than anywhere else, and maybe it has to do with, we always say, what high school did you go to, that type of thing here. And kind of a status symbol of what high school you went to. I mean, we know that this pecking order of bad school, good school. And I fight that because I just tell you this, that, I went into Dawes, it was the second lowest performing school in the state. When I left there, it was maybe 10th or 11th lowest. Great job, but we were still a failing school. But I would have put, and I say this honestly, we enrolled 4 or 5 kids every day, and 4 or 5 kids moved to a different school every day. And so you have 4 or 5 new kids coming into school. Michael Newman knows that from Western. Every day, sitting in the counselor's office. 4 kids have moved, they could be homeless. They're sitting and they're enrolling in your school, and 4 are leaving. That doesn't happen at, high-income schools. And so what these teachers are doing on a daily basis, to be called a failing school or a bad school, it's terrible. And we've got to get out of that. Now, that doesn't mean we shouldn't have accountability. I believe in accountability. But what we have to do is find authentic ways to say, is a school doing, an effective job at what they're doing, as opposed to at Dawes High School, 85% of the students are free and reduced lunch, and 1/3 of the students are either English language learners or special education students that come with great students but come with more challenges. And so, how do we begin to assess and hold a school accountable for doing the things that's not just based on the student income and the exclusivity of the school? And I'll leave with this. It's kind of a silly thing, but I believe it. If we wanted to line up high schools in this county from top to bottom, we could save a lot of money testing and just go count the cars in the student parking lot.
I'm sure that's true. Debbie, I want to go back to what you said, because you made the point that parents are going to find the schools that they want their kids to go to, and they may go to great lengths to get their kids into those schools. There's really no debate. Nobody's sitting here talking about the results of the manual magnet, right? It's the top-rated public school in the state consistently. And many of the kids who are coming into that program are high-achieving.
Well, they're selected.
Maybe they're made better by being around other high-achieving kids throughout their 4-year period. It has some people saying, there's a great model. Why not build more of those?
But what makes manual great is it's so selective that you get the highest achieving kids in the county going there. Of course it's going to do well. They're going to do well if they didn't have a teacher in the room, probably. No, that's a little bit drastic. There are good teachers at manual. I know, Mike, you're a good principal too. I don't think I think that continuing, as you have talked about and you talked about, continuing to build magnets to get people together, whether it's for diversity or to attract kids to stay in the district, whatever it is, it's almost like you've put a layer over a layer over a layer. Here's another solution, and you haven't decided, well, let's not do that, let's do this. It's let's do this, then let's do this, let's do this, and let's do this. And you've got all these things working together, and maybe this one down here isn't working well anymore, or maybe there's a reside school that's hurting because they've lost all their most high-achieving students. I don't want to say talented, because everybody has talent, you have to find it. But so you've got these layers of attempts to make things better, and they've kind of making things worse in some ways. So I really think you have to kind of peel back what you're doing, and it seems like that's what the district is doing, to make sure it's working well for everybody. That's the bottom line, is to get back to student achievement. And I do think diversity is an important goal. Again, the world is a diverse place, and we have to learn to respect each other. But I think maybe getting back to making sure what schools we have are doing well. And I think I support building in West Louisville, having more options there. I know we've got a school, elementary school, going up next to the Y. I'm on the Y board, and I'm really proud of that too. And doing some other things to make there be great options for everyone. So yeah, I didn't read all of Mandy's articles immediately, because I'd read some and I'd feel guilty. Oh my gosh, so many things that didn't get done. At least the short time I was there, but I read them, and it was very informative, but not very surprising, right?
Raoul, did you want to weigh in on that as well?
I thought the series was fantastic. Not having a child in the school system, I had never focused on magnet schools before. And I think that series and the interview she did with me forced me to become aware, or try to become aware, of magnets and what was actually going on in the schools. So I commend her and the paper for that series.
I want to make sure we save time at the end. If you all have questions, go ahead and write them on one of those sheets in the back, and then I'll see if Mick or Greg could go grab those for us. I do want to jump ahead and just ask you, Dr. Polio, because I know you're so passionate about this. Raoul says, I'm still on the fence on how I would, am I going to support this with the dual resides in the West End? Is this, and you said you don't want to be that person that you read about in the book that you didn't do, you know, the best thing moving forward. And it's a moving target, it really is. So is this your hill to die on? Is this it for you?
I don't know if I like that terminology,
Okay.
my hill to die on.
All right, well, you know what, is this
I mean,
it?
I
Is
think
this your,
this is-
what would you call it?
I mean, you know, I would say this, you know, it's a lot of pressure to be put on someone, and to be honest with you, many times, I've said this before, paralysis or inactivity is healthier for a superintendent's job, long-term job. You know, the more you do this, the more controversial it is. And we're tackling a lot of controversial issues right now. It is difficult on board members, superintendent, my team, schools, everybody. I mean, we're tackling tough issues that are extremely divided and unfortunately too often based on politics, which I think is unfortunate, should not be in the school systems and education across America, but it is. However, you know, I believe this. I believe that it is, you know, as a superintendent, it is my ethical and moral obligation to shine a light on things that I think are negatively impacting student success, and especially when it's impacting in greater ways black children and brown children across our community. I do believe, Mandy asked me this when I interviewed with her, can we drastically change student achievement, eliminate the achievement gap without changing student assignment? And we can improve it, but I do not think we can do this and eliminate it and vastly reduce it without significant change to student assignment. And so it is one of the most important issues that I will deal with as a superintendent. And I will keep saying it until we make major changes or the board asks me to leave.
How much sleep do you lose over the idea of serving 110,000 kids and serving every single kid? Because that's really hard.
Yeah. Well, I lost a lot of sleep as a principal, you know, when I had 1,200 kids in a school, because anything can happen any day. You're dealing with so many issues, just so many societal issues that come inside of the school walls that impact student achievement. And so I lost a lot of sleep that way. The good thing about being a principal is I could lead by proximity. So if I needed to improve a teacher or something, I could go there. You can't do that as a leader when you are talking nearly 100,000 students, in 155 schools. It took me nearly 2 years to get into every school. So that's a huge challenge when it comes to it, and you have to learn that it's sometimes harder to lead, but when you change systemically, that's what has to happen. Because, we have principals out there, we are saying improve student belonging, and this is important. I want to give a face to this. The executive administrator of student assignment and choice in JCPS right now, and she knows I share her story all the time, Amanda Averett Bush, who grew up in West Louisville and went through JCPS. Her children go through JCPS. She went to Stewart Middle School in Valley Station. That's where she had to go to get the advanced program. But in order to be on the dance team, she had to take the TARC home from Valley Station to West Louisville as an 11-year-old, with a transfer every single night. And I just say, how can we expect students to have a sense of belonging when that is the requirement to participate in an extracurricular activity? And so I believe Amanda's mother should have had the choice to take advantage of that, but also have the choice, choice, period. And so, I lose more sleep about not taking action than I do taking action.
You want to go through some
Let's
questions here?
get some questions from the audience.
How can black students be winners and have that sense of belonging without some neighborhood schools?
Well, once again, I want to say, I think that the term, we have a lot of charged terms, politically charged terms in this debate. Busing is one, neighborhood schools is another. You know, in a large urban area, and I want to say this, nearly every city in America right now is struggling with how to assign students to schools to achieve the same things we want to achieve. You know, but I don't believe in neighborhood schools, but I do believe in choice. I had choice as a parent, and I believe all parents should have choice, and we need to empower parents. Right now, only 15% of black students are even applying to a magnet school, just putting in an application. And so we have to expand choice for all of our students, and I believe when you do that, and you give all students the same opportunity for choice, then you will get a better sense of belonging out of students. Now, that's not the only thing. There's a lot of other things that have to happen too, but I do believe it's an important one.
We're getting lots of questions, so we'll go through these.
Yeah, this question from someone in the audience. What will it take for all schools to have the magnet school qualities?
Again?
What will it take for all schools to have the magnet school qualities?
Well, I'll start and say, first of all, what are those qualities? If we're talking about exclusivity, meaning you can choose who you bring into the school and you can kick them out if they don't perform, that's an impossibility when you have a resides. That's an impossibility when you're bringing in English language learners, homeless students, mobility. So, you know, when I hear people say, like, why don't we just build another manual? All it will do once again is create more exclusivity and more challenges for other schools. And so, you know, what we have to understand is research is very clear. Poverty has a direct relationship on student achievement. And so we can't use that as an excuse, but as a community, first of all, we have to resource schools with high poverty. And second of all, we have to have an understanding of that. And then third, we have to begin to improve some of our community issues that we always just place on the school system. I mean, you know, homelessness. I've been asked before, what's JCPS doing about homelessness? And I'm like, I mean, that's a community issue that impacts schools greatly. And I just think as a community, those communities that have seen the biggest success all say, you know, we have to come at this at many angles, including societal issues, social issues, you know, housing, but also hold our school system accountable. And I think we have to do that better.
Another question. Research suggests that teachers make the greatest difference in student achievement. Dr. Polio, you talked about incentivizing highly qualified teachers to teach in low-performing schools. Where are you on that?
Well, we have as a district, so a small amount. It's probably not near the amount. But I'm going to tell you, the hard part of this is, you know, it is just not for teachers. There is to work in a high-poverty school that they used to call failing schools and then priority schools and CSA. They've had all kinds of names on this. It takes somebody with passion to do it. You must have passion to do this. You must be willing to, you know, engage students who maybe don't want to learn because of trauma outside of the school, and every day open your arms and say, I don't worry about what happened yesterday. I'm willing to teach you. Come on, so glad you're back. And that takes a certain passion and energy that a paycheck just doesn't guarantee. But I know when I was a principal at Doss, what I would have liked to have had as a principal and as the SBDM is choice. So our struggles right now as a profession, if you have an opening in math, you may have one applicant. And so it's even more so in high poverty schools. And that's a real difficult equation when you are the principal of a high poverty school and it's either I hire this person or I don't get a teacher at all. And then you're dealing with trying to improve this person as well. So, you know, what we want to do is to increase the applicant pool and choices for principals, especially at our high poverty, and improve the ones, you know, the retention is a key part of this. Keeping teachers and then attracting them. So we're looking at ways to do this, definitely increasing pay for our highest need schools, but that comes with a lot of challenges as well.
Standardized testing is one of the ways that some of these decisions are made for magnet schools. The question from the audience is standardized testing a help or a hindrance to school success, and is there a better way to evaluate schools and teachers?
Yes and yes. And I'm sorry, anybody else can jump in, but we have to look and say what standardized testing is doing. Mandy talked about it, what it's doing to schools across America right now. The only schools that really are accountable, we have to be honest, are those that are very high poverty schools and high minority schools. Our other schools get test scores, but they're not held accountable for those test scores, only what we would consider the bottom. And so our highest needs kids, our highest needs schools, are teachers who are working many times the hardest, there's teachers everywhere working extremely hard, are the ones that are being held accountable. And unfortunately, because of testing and standardized testing, what we end up with is almost we have to teach to testing. And so our kids in our highest poverty schools get the least engaging student experiences. And that's very problematic. We can't do some of the field trips and engaging things that students love because we got to get ready for this test because the principal's job's on the line and every teacher's job is on the line. I believe there is a more authentic way to do it. The money we spend on testing in this country, it's staggering. And why can't we have teams that come into a school and evaluate students by what they see happening in the classroom? Independent auditors who come in and get to say, and no, this is a challenging school, high poverty, but I get to see what's happening in the classroom. There is a place for some testing, I believe that. I'm not saying eliminate it, but we have to get away from that being the sole indicator of a good school or a bad school.
One more question, and then we'll let each of you wrap up with some final thoughts. And this is a long question to get to a short question, but it asks why Cameron has so many kids from all over. Is Ballard more localized? None of the kids in this person's neighborhood goes to the local public school, which is hard on an 8th grader.
Which is what? Cameron? Is that what?
Yeah, Cameron was the middle school. The ultimate question that it leads to is, for this group, they chose to go to private school, which is an option that you face all the time with kids. And in this case, it seems to be because as an 8th grader, they didn't relate to any of the other kids in the middle school. It wasn't local.
I don't understand. They couldn't get into their reside school? Or?
I'm just reading a question, but why does Cameron have so many kids from all over? And you talked about that a little bit earlier. Is Ballard more localized? You talked about that as well. None of the kids in their neighborhood go to the local public school, which is why their 8th grader chose to go to private school.
Well, I would ask why does no one in the neighborhood go to the local public school? I guess is the question that we would have to dig into there, that you could probably do a whole series on,
right,
of why they don't want to go to Cameron. That is correct. So, but this person is saying that they're not choosing to go to that reside school.
Okay, all right. I don't know.
Let's do.
Cameron's a good school.
We've got, like I said, a lot of questions. Your final thoughts as we move forward and trying to hit that moving target of diversity, equity, all of closing the achievement gap. I mean, we looked at the timeline, we've seen all of the different iterations of everything that we have tried. Your final thoughts from each panelist, and Raoul, let's start with you on, do you have hope that we can do it, and maybe one thing that you would like to see that we could do to help achieve it?
I do have hope, and when you make the final plan, I would hope that it would take into consideration not only location, academic performance, resources, and safety. And I would hope that that would be included in one plan or maybe 4 plans.
Can you repeat the 4th one?
Safety.
Safety.
Safety to and from and in school.
Debbie, how about you?
Well, I think that Marty has an ambitious plan laid out. At least I know there's some more specifics you're going to be giving to the board sometime soon. But I would, of course, I think most of us would agree with this, would not ever want to give up on an effort at diversity in schools. And I know you may make some changes, or it's the board's decision on whether they'll take this recommendation. I know I see James Craig here and Corey Schul, and those are big decisions. And we've made big decisions over the years about student assignment. But not to forget that diversity has been a value here, and people have invested in that for a long, long time. But also the achievement issue is all tied up in that, and of course that's the goal. It's all tied up into achievement and diversity and where you want to go to school and perceived excellence in schools. And I think that's some of the magnet thing, is that when you get a lot of high-achieving kids together, of course it's going to be a great school. And so that's in a way not fair to compare with the kids who go to the neighborhood school. So we have to understand that. But I think whatever plan goes in place, is you still need to track how diverse schools are so you can see how it's going. I think that's important. We've done that for decades here, and I think the community appreciates that and wants to know, that we're still working on making sure kids go to school with other kinds of kids. But I think Marty's very passionate, and there's certainly important to have that passion, or you can't do that job. But the achievement has got to be the bottom line too, and sometimes I worry we go through all these big seismic shifts and big changes that we're having to restart, and achievement has to be a constant. Whatever else is happening, achievement has to be a constant in a school. And I know there are teachers out there working hard every day, and you're talking about plans and we're talking about history, and they're just going to school the next day doing the work that I'm not doing, and a lot of people here aren't doing. Some have for many years, but we have to support them no matter what the changes are happening. Make sure that tomorrow is a good day in the school system. Not just looking toward, well, we may have this plan in place and the board's going to vote in a year, and well, we got kids going to school tomorrow, and that's got to be the focus. And that's what I worry about with all these, these big discussions and changes. Not that they shouldn't happen, but we always need to be supporting what's going on every day.
Let's let Dr. Polio close and get the last word, because you're in the middle of really what will be a lengthy campaign. And so what are you up against with the board? What are you up against with the public to get this through?
Well, I'm confident the board members, they've all expressed, a desire and interest in bold change around this. So I don't think anyone I present this to, no one looks at this when we present what's happening now and says, let's just keep this. That is almost across the board of what we're doing now is not the right thing. That doesn't mean that we don't want diversity and improved achievement, but what we're doing now is not working. We have to say that, and we must make significant change. So I believe the board is 100% behind that, without a doubt. I believe the community is behind that. I don't want this to be a political issue. I don't want to see, things like neighborhood schools and busing, those terms get into this, and instead focusing on what's best for all of our children. I can tell you this, being a superintendent is incredibly hard right now. In this country alone, in the past 18 months, the top 7 school districts in America by enrollment, every single one of them, their superintendent has quit. All top 7 have quit. And in the Council of Great City Schools, it's like half of the superintendents have quit. I can't imagine doing this job in a community that I didn't come up in, so to speak. I didn't grow up here, but I've been in JCPS for 25 years. I can't even imagine thinking about doing this in a city where I didn't have those roots and didn't truly care about kids and just, 25 years of experience, knowing that every day as an educator you have a chance to change a kid's life. And so, that's why I do this. I don't claim to have all the right answers and the solutions, and that's why we want public feedback, but I will stand by what we're doing now is not working, and we are going to make a plan that is going to provide for significant change to that. And we will obviously bring that plan with plenty of opportunity for feedback from everyone in the community. And I'm hopeful and confident that we will find a place that we can say what we will be doing in the future is much better than what we're doing now.
When are you expecting a vote? That's coming up, we think, in May?
I mean, that's what we're looking at right now. We are, so I can tell everyone, I get the question, where's the plan right now? So what we did, we had a plan when it was just middle and high school about 2 years ago before COVID. COVID has messed up a lot, as everyone knows. We had to pause that. We've been struggling just to have school, and so, but what we studied was elementary was just as problematic, and they're not aligned. So why would we do something that's not all four, elementary, middle, high, and magnet together, and have an aligned system? So we are working on that. Some of the same concepts that I've talked about that we are working on, like dual resides. So we have it from a conceptual model. We are finalizing our initial, what we would like to call a draft plan, so we can get feedback on that, and then make sure that we have time to change and improve that. Obviously get board input. We would like to do it in the May-June timeline, but what we want to make sure is we get this right. In 1975-76, they had to create it in 6 months. I mean, that was their time frame. I can't even imagine having to do that. Merge two systems, two boards, and, in 6 months, create this new system. So our most important thing is let's get this right. It's too important not to, and that's what we want to do.
Thank you very much. We wanted to thank all of our panelists. Do we need to say, are we tomorrow NTI or in person?
We're in person tomorrow. We're in person.
I felt like I had to ask that as the final question. I would also like to thank Mandy and Tracy for their expertise in coming tonight and being part of the discussion.
Yeah, Raoul, Debbie, Dr. Polio, thank you so much for being here. For our audience, both here and virtually, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it, and Rachel has another Bridging the Divide program coming up real soon.
Yes, we're talking to change makers in our community, and that's on February the 17th. Sign up. We'd love to see you. Thank you all so much. Really appreciate it.